Well, thank you very much for taking your time to watch this video. It's been said no good deed goes unpunished. Sounds a little cynical, doesn't it? You do a good deed, you would expect it to be rewarded, not punished. But in actual fact, too often you go out of your way to do something significant and meaningful for somebody else, and it's like they don't even notice it. Or maybe they notice it, but they expected it. So you don't get any sense of appreciation. Or maybe worse than that, when the roles reversed, they turn on you, and rather than doing good in return, they do evil. And so the statement, no good deed goes unpunished. But in real estate, we had a situation one time where a fairly large commission was involved, and only about half the commission came in. Now, the board bylaws said in those situations, the selling office gets paid fully before the listing office gets anything. I didn't think that was fair. It wasn't the salesperson's fault that the significant money wasn't there on closing, so we agreed to accept half and split it down the middle. Well, sometime later, the roles reversed. This time, we have the listing, insignificant commission comes in, there isn't enough to pay out both sides, just enough for half. It's the same cooperating broker this time, but this time the broker, rather than understanding, demands full payment, and my agent gets nothing. The natural reaction in a situation like that is to say, well, I will never do it again. From now on, I'm going to look after my own first before anybody else. Get our back up and become cynical. And, you know, you see that so often in driving, for example. Driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, your first reaction is, I'm going to cut them off. I'm going to teach them a lesson. I'm going to adopt their behavior. But there's a key, and the key is so necessary to learn if we're ever going to understand and approach these situations properly. Colossians chapter 3 says, and whatsoever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by Him. And then it goes down and it expounds on that. It says, wives, submit yourself to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents. And it says, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. And then it says, servants, obey your masters. But the problem is, what happens if the wife wants to submit to the husband, but the husband's a tyrant? A husband doesn't behave properly, doesn't love his wife, or doesn't act like he loves his wife. How can the wife submit in that circumstance? Or the children are under abusive parents, and the parents are commanding them to do this and maybe strike them, all kinds of ill behavior toward the children. How can the children obey the parents? How can you do these things when it's not reciprocated, it's not a proper environment, they don't deserve it? And the key again is whatsoever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto man, knowing that of the Lord you shall receive the reward of your inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. And that's absolutely imperative to understand. We're not doing it for them, we're doing it to them, but we're doing it for the Lord. He's the one that we are obeying when we obey our parents. He's the one that we are treating when we treat somebody else properly. And one time the disciples came to Jesus and they said, Lord, increase our faith. And Jesus gave them an interesting illustration. He said, which of you, having a servant plowing or feeding cattle, will say unto him by and by, when he comes in from the field, go and sit down to meat? And will not rather say unto him, make ready wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself and serve me till I have eaten and drunken, and afterwards thou shalt eat and drink? Does he thank that servant because he did those things that were commanded him? I trow not. So likewise, when you have done all those things which are commanded you, say, we're unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. So here's a picture of a servant. He's out working in the heat of the day in the farm. He comes back in from his day of labor. He gets no thanks for his work. More work is heaped on him. Now you can serve me my meal. And there's no thanks. It's expected. And then what about the situation where not only does he not receive thanks, gratification, but he's treated shabbily as a result of it. He does good and evil comes his way. And the Bible talks about that. It says, servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the forward. For this is thankworthy, if a man for conscience toward God endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what glory is it, When ye be buffeted for your faults, you take it patiently. But if when you do well and suffer for it, you take it patiently, this is acceptable to God. So what it's saying is, yeah, sometimes your good deed goes unappreciated. Sometimes you receive bad for good. Sometimes you're called to serve a master who doesn't really treat you right, or submit to a parent, or submit to a husband that doesn't treat you right. But it says, do it unto God and not unto man. And it says, knowing that of the Lord you shall receive the reward of your inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. You know, in our business, and when I use the reference of real estate because I'm in real estate. So you have a situation where you're representing a buyer, but there's an item that's missed on closing. The seller took it. And you go ahead out of your own pocket and you make it good. You replace that item and you don't get any thanks. And to make matter worse, the client who you sold the house to, when it comes time for him to sell it, he lists with somebody else. You go to a demanding client, you're a tradesman, and you go overboard trying to make sure that it's just exactly perfect and there's no appreciation. Or maybe it's a neighbor. You got a tree hanging over their property. They want you to trim it. It's their responsibility to trim it, but you say, no, I understand it's my tree, and you trim it. Then there's a challenge with a fence line. You can put the fence right down the line, but it's going to cramp their ability to get in and out of their car. So you move your fence over. You back down, and then the neighbor doesn't thank you for it and doesn't reciprocate. Or in families, you go above and beyond to make sure that everybody's happy. There's a settlement and an inheritance, and you back down. You concentrate on being a peacemaker, and yet it isn't reciprocated. You'll never stay with it without a bad attitude unless you keep in mind whatsoever you do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto man. Know that of the Lord you shall receive the reward of your inheritance, for you serve, not your neighbor, not your family member, you serve the Lord Christ. So, when comes time to doing a good deed for your fellow man, yeah, it might go unpunished. You might be an unprofitable servant, but understanding that behind the scene, there's God, and you will receive your reward. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. I look forward to talking to you again next week.